Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion about the economic impacts of legalization on Texas. We are joined by mostly Texans who are working all over the country and all over the world to talk about it with us. And I would like for each of them to introduce themselves to us, tell us about your companies and where all y'all work.
I'll go first, if you don't mind, just because I'm the token non-Texan here.
Okay, go ahead, Paul.
I'm Paul Rosen. I am currently in Toronto, Canada, which is my birthplace. Canada, otherwise known as the largest recreational cannabis market legal in the world, and only the second country to legalize cannabis shortly after Uruguay. I'm an attorney by training, and I've been in the cannabis industry as an entrepreneur and an executive since 2012. And I'm currently working very actively in the U.S. cannabis industry on multiple fronts.
Sal?
Great. Hi, I'm Sal Moran Barnes from MPG Consulting. We are a strategic advisory services firm to the cannabis industry. We serve both public regulators, enforcement agencies, and the like, along with private companies, public companies, and investment firms. We've done strategic projects in 28 states and 8 countries now, and are currently representing, 9 out of 10 major public domestic MSOs and strategic initiatives.
All right, Sharon.
Hi, my name is Sharon Dadeji. I'm the founder and CEO of Elevate Cannabis. We're multi-state operators with location in Massachusetts and in Oregon. We are also a huge advocate for social equity. We lobby in different states where we talk about how we can get PLCs, indigenous people, and brown and black people into the cannabis industry to create generational wealth. Outside of that, I am the youngest African-American man in the United States to open a retail cannabis shop at the age of 23. And I'm originally from here, from Dallas, Texas. I went to James Bowie High School and attended Timberview for some time. So I'm a Texan. So it's great to be home to talk about this.
That's so cool. Kelly, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting me today. My name is Kelly Seringer. I'm a Texas girl, raised in the Hill Country, went to Texas A&M, and my degree was in biochemistry and genetics, but I took it to Wall Street and started following the pharmaceutical companies, and then started my own hedge fund in 2001. So now we have been running healthcare hedge funds for about 20 years. And recently we have looked at the cannabis sector and started ESG and impact funds on the venture side and on the public equity side.
All right, we've got a lot of really meaty topics to cover, so we're just going to jump right in with Sal. Set the stage for the audience about what the global cannabis marketplace looks like, what's going on in the world, in the U.S. and here in Texas.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really interesting time, and it's growing every day. It seems like a new market's opening up. But essentially, I think for the viewers here and what everyone is the most interested in is what would Texas look like as compared to what's happening in the industry internationally, nationally, and then this part. So from an international standpoint, you have sort of Canada leading the way in terms of its regulation, in terms of its market maturity, in terms of its ability to produce, and somewhat building sort of national brand status. In the United States, that's a little bit different because we are not allowed to basically have any sort of operations outside of their own states. Canada's the same way by province, but what I mean by that is if you operate in California, if you operate in Oregon, if you operate in Washington, all adult use states, you can't use economies of scale or actually have business operations that touch each other financially in those states.
Oh, why is that?
Oh, it's just because it is not yet federally legal, right? So it is a federal illegally process to transport cannabis across state lines, even if it's two legal states right now. And so what you're seeing is every time a new state opens up, it essentially adds that much more market demand to the national market. And the most sort of disruptive factor in cannabis is the opening of a new market. That's why every time something opens up, it's a gold rush that happens. Now, the determining factor of the success on that market is not only demographic, like population size, right, wealth of the population, but also how that market is structured, be it like the amount of licenses up and down the value chain, how much you can grow, how much you can process, and how much you can sell, and then how many of those licenses you can own individually. From a Texas standpoint, right, what that means is, number one, if Texas ever legalizes adult use cannabis in a way that creates a robust market, right, which may or may not happen before federal legalization happens, it's going to be very dependent on the amount of licensing structures on who can be able to actually participate in the market and at what level. So that whole conversation about U.S. federal legalization is going to be such an important determining factor on what Texas is going to look like, because I don't think Texas is going to legalize anytime soon, right? And it's probably going to be more dependent on the legal argument than it is the state argument.
All right, well, we now have 18 adult use states and 36 medical states. And right now, Texas is what's called a high CBD, low THC state that's on the cusp of going full medical. So what do you think that will look like in Texas when we do get adult use, understanding that is probably a few years out?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on the licensing scheme, right, and the amount of legal supply. And I'm sure that everyone here on the conference agrees that just legalizing an adult use system is not necessarily going to supply demand in a way that's efficient. It is how many licenses you have in that specific market, and is there enough legal produced cannabis to be able to supply that whatsoever. So it really boils down to, in terms of the economic gains for entrepreneurs, in terms of economic gains for tax, in terms of economic gains for social equity initiatives, if Texas sets up a mechanism that allows it to produce and then sell sufficient legal supply. If they don't do that, if they limit the amount of licenses, if they limit the amount of sort of participants in that industry, what they will do is inadvertently incentivize the illicit market growth, because you've basically taken away the legal disincentive to participate in that. So it is very, very careful. When we work with different states and setting it up, it's all about determining the proper licensing and production scheme to be able to address that market in a way that sufficiently supplies the market with legal cannabis, right? Not just a little bit. Texas just says it's legal, but not that many stores can open up in a way to control the market. They will do the exact opposite.
Well, so that viewers understand, usually when a state legalizes medical marijuana, they only allow a few licenses, maybe 2 or 5 licenses. And so you have this ultra competitive situation. And as time has gone on and we have more and more legal states, you have what's called these multi-state operators that, as Sal was mentioning, they're in multiple states now, and they have licensing arrangements, and then they will go together and go for a license in another state. Texas is interesting in that our statute is an unlimited statute. There's no limit to it, even though we're a medical state. We only have 3 license holders right now, but there's not a statute.
No state has a rule that puts a limit. It's just the discretion of the licensing authority. So like there's no I don't know any jurisdiction that has announced in their program that there's a hard cap on licenses. So there's no de jure hard cap. There's a de facto cap, though, no doubt.
And I just want to tap in real quick. So as you guys see the legalization in Oklahoma, for example, Oklahoma is what you call an oversaturated market. There is no current cap in Oklahoma license. So if you have the capital, if you have $500,000 to $1 million, you can go to Oklahoma right now, as long as you meet whatever. So most states have like zoning criteria where you have to be 1,000 square footage away from a K-12 grade. You have to be 1,000 square footage from an existing dispensary. So some state they don't even have those, where the zoning requirement is you can be in zone A and stores can open up right next to each other. So the biggest thing that I believe Sal is trying to really articulate that he touched on really well is that the profit margins, right, are if once the state legalized the cannabis, the bill goes out, right? Now is like in Oklahoma, for example, compared to Massachusetts with a limited license state, where the cities limit, they put a cap. So the state gives the cities the option to either put a cap or make it unlimited. That's the state of Massachusetts, right? And most cities opt in to putting a cap on licenses. So we have 3 shops currently in the state of Massachusetts. Each of our city put a cap on 2. It's not state mandate, but the city determined they only wanted 2. They reflected it on how many liquor licenses that they currently had in their jurisdiction, and they reflected that and said, this is how many recreational license we're going to give out to cannabis businesses. So we won 1 out of those 2. Now, when you go to states like that, even though they're very competitive to get a license, the beauty about those states is you make more money. You make a lot more money. It's more profitable. Nobody's in business to not make money, right? I don't care how like nice and kind you are. Like they're in business. Unless you're a nonprofit, then you're okay, right? But if you're a for-profit, your goal is to make money. Right now, if you go to Oklahoma, are some businesses losing and not really making as much? They're not. Some businesses are not making that much money because the saturation, there's no cap on licenses. Anybody and their mom can move in and start their business.
And to that point, where does that cannabis go that's not sold legally, produced in that market?
Hey, and you know, what I would say is the illicit market is still there, right?
Oh.
Regardless of how we look at it, you have 280E. That means that right now, cannabis is still federally legal, right? So we cannot write we can't write anything off as outside of cost of goods sold. That's the only write-off we get, right? So let's just say we spent $500,000 in building out our dispensary. We can't write it off because we're still federally illegal. So what that does then is we have taxation. So on a city level, we have a 3% tax, right, in the state of Massachusetts and Oregon. On a state level, we have a 17% tax, giving us a tax of 20%, right? Then you have a federal taxation on top of that. So when you look at your gross revenue, half of your money, 50% is going to just taxes. Like if you're not fully vertical, if you don't have, so what happens is it's not that we want to sell higher in product, is just that those taxes is then being reflected to the customer. Now, when we talk about the black market and why they're succeeding, a lot of times is because of taxes that are tacked on to cannabis businesses.
Their economics are better right now, period. Right? I mean, that's just the way it is. It's tough to compete economically against the black market right now.
Yeah, it's not what people would think.
No.
So, Sal, of all these different states that you've worked in, which ones are model that you would think that have the most similarity to Texas, or that Texas ought to follow? Either one.
So no one's really got it right. I'm going to say from an economic and regulatory perspective, it's going to be Colorado, but then Colorado is now having to retroactively implement social equity programs to sort of, do the right thing. It would be a mix of name your effective social equity program, which is still yet to be determined, but it'd be a mix of that in Colorado, in my opinion.
What do you think about Illinois? I think Illinois has done a pretty good job with their.
No, they're terrible.
Yeah,
terrible.
their lawsuits they've yet to settle.
Terrible.
They're so
no, Illinois is out of the picture. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
So
we
in
can't even
terms
talk
of-
about. I just get sad and just hurt about Illinois because I spent a lot of money out there to try to go after application. We went after about 7 applications. We still haven't heard back on whether because of the lawsuits and different things. But I would have to say Massachusetts. I think people are going to be shocked on what Massachusetts has done in regards to social equity. I think that they're currently holistically the gold standard right now when it comes to social equity. And I'll break that down to why I say that. Right now, they put a corporate cap and are giving corporations that max on retail license 3 retail licenses, period. What that does is give people, minorities, an opportunity to have a fighting chance to actually get into business. Because like Sal said earlier, we have multi-state operators where they're going from state to state and they're controlling the whole food chain, right? And they're just winning licenses. But because of this cap, we're giving more minorities and more POCs, brown and black people, an opportunity to get into the business.
So let's say in that front, if they pull it off well, let's say in New York. And I think with an Illinois, it was the best intentions, terrible execution. Terrible.
100%. 100%.
Really good intentions, horribly executed, right? No one's happy. There. So that's
I agree.
It's tough to do. It's tough to do well.
Well, I want to turn the conversation a little bit to COVID and some, recession issues. And Paul, what role can legal cannabis play in responding to Texas economic recession? Just the little bit depression we have from COVID.
Yeah, well, a lot of that is going to depend upon the state of Texas, because the outcomes can range from mildly positive to overwhelmingly positive. And I'll give you some sort of like real world examples. So there's 3 really direct, most primary impacts that it can have to improve the beleaguered books, if you will, of states. It can, 1, create a meaningful amount of tax revenue. So we've mentioned Illinois. Illinois collected more tax revenue off cannabis in the last quarter than they did off alcohol. So we're talking about real numbers. Illinois in 2020 collected about $53 million of state taxes right off the cannabis industry, with a population less than half the size of Texas, and at a very early time in their actual cannabis economy. Massachusetts, which has been legal since 2016, with a population of 6 million people, collected just under $82 million of tax revenue. And Nevada collected over $105 million, and California well above that. So we're talking about a meaningful contribution to the likely heavily indebted balance sheets of state treasuries. Secondly, it's a great source of jobs and economic empowerment. Again, subject to the caveat that the state has to embrace some free market dynamics in order to get the full economic benefits. There are right now estimated, according to Headset, which is a top data firm, about 321,000 jobs right now across the United States in legal cannabis. To put that into perspective, there's 127,000 dentists in America. There is more legal cannabis employees than there are electrical engineers, EMTs, writers, editors, aircraft pilots, engineers, and moving up, and that will continue to grow. So it's a source of good, safe, high-paying, in some instances, jobs. There is estimates, for example, that if Texas were to bring a kind of a free market approach, there could be between 20 and 40,000 new jobs created for plant-touching operators, and up to 10,000 jobs in ancillary industries like consulting, legal, insurance, IT, security. So you've got good jobs, and keep in mind that a lot of the commerce of cannabis is already happening in the gray market, where there's no tax collection and there's also no documented employment. So the employees are sort of more vulnerable. So you have good above market jobs, you have meaningful contributions to the tax revenue. And then if you stop dedicating money towards the enforcement of cannabis laws, i.e., arresting and imprisoning likely people of color who have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, which was as much a race war as it was a war on drugs, then you save money, because you're not allocating diminished scarce resources to enforcement or to incarceration. There are probably more people incarcerated in the United States for cannabis possession than any single other criminal offense, and that is, there's economics. The fact that there's a private prison industry is a large sort of driver. It was mentioned earlier that both the pharmaceutical industry is lobbying against big cannabis, as is big tobacco. You know who else is lobbying against big cannabis? Police unions and private prisons, because it's their best customer. Straight up, it is. So you've got the tangible benefits of taxes and employment, and you have the intangible benefits of social justice, social equity, economic empowerment, empowering historically disadvantaged communities if the political will to architect a broad program is there. On the other hand, those benefits are mitigated if Texas makes the decision to treat cannabis like it's some radioactive substance that can cause, civic decay, and creates a very small medical program with a very limited amount of medical conditions that a physician can prescribe for, i.e. New York up until basically now. You're not going to get those economic benefits. You're going to have very few jobs in the industry, very, very low taxes. So the truth is that the state of Texas should bring a broad free market approach with the necessary regulation to ensure that the abuses of the market don't damage the integrity of the actual industry that's trying to be built. But they've really, in my opinion, need to bring a broad market and look at what more mature jurisdictions can look like when they get over their anxiety about what is the effect of cannabis on our communities. And what they'll see is largely very limited to no negative outcomes, no teenage use spiking, no havoc on the roads because of high drivers, no gateway drug to other more serious drugs, none of that, but the benefits of employment, taxes, and empowerment.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add what you said to what you said there about it being a gateway drug. I think that's a big it's a big thing that people say, and
it's a big lie, is what it is.
It's a big lie, and there's actually good data out of Israel that shows that people who are trying to get off of opioid drug addiction, if they're smoking cannabis while they're detoxing off of that, they're 95% more likely to stay off of opioids.
Yes, Johns Hopkins
is enormous.
Johns Hopkins published research. Hardly, let's understand. Former Mayor Bloomberg is an alumni, the biggest contributor. He's on record of being opposed to cannabis. But Hopkins conducted research that determined that cannabis was harm reductive from a public health perspective, specifically because it's shown efficacy in transitioning people off opiates.
Yeah, and I think that's an enormous benefit, because opioid addiction is such a huge problem in the United States, and the pharmaceutical industry has benefited wildly.
They created it.
They created an issue with opioids, and they created an addiction problem in this country. And so now you have something that could potentially help people, and you're trying to stymie the use of it. It doesn't make sense. Texas has a chance here to really be excellent at something. And they can do that by looking at what other states have done, the mistakes that they've made, and improve on that. And like you said, make a free market system that benefits everyone.
So I just want to bring up one thing that's specific to Texas. And obviously I work in the industry. Obviously I believe in the social value of it. Obviously I want jobs created. The challenge we have specifically in our state, though, is when you talk about economics and you talk about job creation, no matter what, They will all be a drop in the bucket compared to what would occur economically for the state if oil rose $10. So you look at an Illinois, you look at a Massachusetts, and you look at the numbers in tax revenue, and even if you do that as a multiple by the Texas state population, it is a drop in the bucket compared to what the energy industry provides this state. So now you've got to think about that in terms of political capital. If you're a politician and you have a conservative base, the economic argument that you're going to make for cannabis is not going to be near as strong as the economic argument you're going to be made for, I don't know, drill in the Hill Country pipeline. I'm from the Hill Country as well too, right? So drill in the Hill Country pipeline. More jobs, more money in the state of Texas by a factor. So that is the uphill battle that we show here in Texas, is that we can spout numbers and jobs all day long, but we have the largest industry in the world based in Texas. And
Sal is right. And that's why, we talk about, the tax revenue that could be generated. That's not really that much to them. I mean, Karl Rove's got a nice little flip chart showing here's Colorado's pot revenue compared to oil revenue.
But one doesn't come at the expense of the other. It's not as if you will diminish your oil revenue by it's.
But we're talking.
But they don't need it, is what we're trying to say.
Yeah, but
it's not a driver.
Are they running a deficit now, or are their books balanced?
There's only a small budgetary shortfall from COVID, actually, but to your free market approach, though, Texas actually does have a good free market statute in that there's no residency requirement. Counties can't interfere. There's not a lot of interference. Like once we open up, it's going to be a good free market open condition. But anyway, today I just want to point out that there's a vote on our medical marijuana statute that's going to open it up to chronic pain, PTSD, and cancer. And some other conditions, which, as y'all know, that's going to blow open the patient pool, and it's going to be a setup for the future. So that is good news.
And we're just trying to
Paul, I wanted to ask you, since you work so much in the industry, who are the key players looking to get into Texas right now?
I am.
I think everybody has a plan to get into
Absolutely.
Texas. Once they come up with the actual plan to do that, all the big MSOs, I know everybody that I talk to on the public side is ready to go. It's just a matter of, how do you do it? How do you lay out that plan?
I think, can I just say, there's some sensitivity on that, in that, like, the MSOs have largely so far, with a few exceptions, been careful around California. Everyone understands California is actually, obviously by population and by dollars, the largest market, but it's been a weird kind of broken market with the regulator having trouble getting control. So I think Texas is by virtue of population, is going to be one of the most sought after markets in the United States. And I think it's just a question of the MSOs. Their appetite will be almost without limitation unless the program is set up in such a way that they view it's better to hold off and wait, which is what has largely happened in California. Most of the MSOs, with some exceptions, have not really deployed much capital yet to California, on a sense that they wanted to wait for the market to form a little bit. But other than that, I would totally agree. Every MSO and companies that you've not heard about that are MSOs that are private are going to look at this as one of the big prizes in U.S. cannabis.
Hey, Lisa, so with the new medical bill, we spoke yesterday and you said there's a cap on THC at 5%. With this new medical bill, would it still be that?
Yeah, unless there's amendments to it. But I mean, there's other good parts about it. Like they can add conditions administratively in between sessions. It's creating a research program that will then bolster the addition of more conditions, or maybe eliminate them, because it's also making it easier for physicians to participate, and it's putting them in more power. So I think that could lead to maybe an Oklahoma situation where they don't even list conditions. It's, get the government out in the middle and, have the doctor decide.
Like every other pharmaceutical.
One step further by then. for
Literally,
adults.
like every other pharmaceutical, like doctors are, if a doctor is entitled to prescribe, they often prescribe one medication for another use. If there's some efficacy, they don't need the FDA doesn't. The FDA approves it, and it's approved, and it's not necessarily that the physician is under a limitation to only prescribe it for the condition that it was approved by the FDA. Once it's approved, if a physician feels it has some, if you will, off-condition efficacy, they're entitled. So why would cannabis be any? If it's a medicine, it should be exactly the same.
Yeah, so that's what Texas is doing. It's the research programs following the physicians and the patients and their treatment. Which is good, then going to add legitimacy to the whole thing, which is something that I guess they feel they need. And so that's good though. They're laying the groundwork. We're going to get it finally. So, yeah, so Shayun, I want to talk to you a little bit about your experience. You're in Oregon and Massachusetts on both coasts. Those are very different markets, very different demographics. What surprised you as you got into this? How are they different? And, what advice would you give to Texas regulators based on your diverse experience there?
Yeah, how hard it is to get into different markets. So Oregon, for example, is like an application process, and it's really straightforward. You're checking a box and seeing if you meet a criteria. With Massachusetts, the regulation was a lot harder, right? It was a little bit more complicated. They were a lot more strict on just the whole process. It took a lot longer. The capital to actually get into a limited license state is a lot greater than capital needed to get into what you guys are proposing right now for the state of Texas, which is an open market where there's no cap on licenses. So if we look at, people, minorities and, indigenous people looking to get into this industry, it does make it more possible for them to actually get in. Now, if for all the regulators out there that are looking to push for Texas legalization and push for social justice and social equity, I would say one thing we could learn from different states is to remove real estate as a criteria in order for you to go after your license or to actually get into the cannabis industry, and to also create a fund that can help minorities by using tax dollars and tax revenues from the cannabis industry, use that fund, a percentage of that fund, to go towards people that have been affected by the war on drugs, and that's communities where mostly of African-American POCs, and just try our best to make sure social equity is a part of the bill.
And just
I would agree with you on that real estate piece. I mean, being a part of the first couple of rounds of Texas applications, when that is the integral central piece of your application is where it is, and you have to secure that real estate that's extremely expensive. That's another barrier to entry. So similarly, economically and operationally, what advice would you give to operators wanting to get into Texas from your experience in Oregon and Massachusetts?
Understand the laws, like don't take shortcuts. It's gonna bite you in the butt just do everything the right way. Get people smarter than you as you're looking to get into this industry. If you don't understand something, you don't have to be the smartest, you don't have to be the best, but what you need to understand is understand your weakness and then get people that are better than you to come along and help you solve those problems. I think everybody's trying to be the jack of all trades and try to do everything by themselves, and then they just suck, you lose. And just being blunt, why who cares if you're Superman? Let's make money. Who cares? I tell people on my team is I don't care who's leading. I just want to be on the winning team. When you look at the NFL, who cares about did you play, how many reps you played? If you have that Super Bowl ring, who cares? As long as you're on that team, on a winning, everybody wants to be on a winning team. So I would say as you're looking to get in, let go of your pride. There is so much money to be made. I see people fighting over really, really idiotic and small things that should not be fought for. Look at the bigger goal. What's your goal? Your goal is to make money. Focus on that. then just like find people that resonate, that fit your core values, and bring them along and have a winning team.
All right, Kelly, talking about making money, I want to learn about investment funds from you. You run a couple of them.
Right.
Tell us about the landscape for cannabis investment funds.
So I look at cannabis kind of, when I first looked at this from the healthcare standpoint, I was following some companies like GW Pharmaceuticals, which have a drug in pediatric epilepsy. And, it was kind of surprising that it worked. And so then I started looking at the sector overall, and it puts me in mind of the biotech sector in the mid-90s and then tech in the early 2000s, where you had, a lot of people come out, get very interested, put a lot of money to work in an industry, and then you see a big correction, and then it's off to the races. So it's kind of like they call it a J curve or a hockey stick. And I think that's where we are now. I think that the upside to this industry is so dramatic because you're talking about companies right now. I mean, imagine running a business where you can't make something in California and sell it in Texas. You can't go across straight state lines with any product. I mean, that we don't have that in any other kind of sector. Imagine a company where you can't use a regular bank. Like there's no banking. And then those are the kinds of issues and things that will come to bear on this sector that will raise it even more. So the upside to cannabis is very dramatic, I think, and we're only at the tip of the iceberg right now. So I like it a lot as a sector. I like it on the public equity side. We have a company that invests in stocks that are currently public. We like that for our investors because it's a much shorter time frame. So every year, you get audited financials and you can have liquidity in that portfolio. So if you need to get out, if you need your money in a couple years, it's there and it's available. We have a venture fund that's a longer term solution for people that want to be involved in the sector, and that's more of a 7 to 10 year time frame. So we have something that meets really everybody's needs for money management. Our funds are, and we touched on this a little bit, Shawoon did, about ESG investing, and we are ESG screened.
What does ESG stand for?
Can you pull up that slide real quick? There we go. So ESG is environmental, social, and governance. And we also look at it on an economic basis. But from the environmental standpoint, all of our companies need to have a strategy for the environment. And specifically, if you look at Texas, water is a big deal there. And the burden on the aquifers and the water supplies in Texas could be substantial with this crop. And so it's paramount that these companies come in with water reclamation and purification built into their growth. That would be a specific thing for Texas. Also, the impact on the power grid. I mean, we saw big problems in Texas this year with power. Using LED lights makes an enormous difference. I'm particularly interested in packaging and utilizing the hemp waste as packaging material for these single-use containers for the cannabis industry. That's a particular thing that I'm interested in. So there's a lot of benefits that you can build into your company on the environmental side. On the social side, Shawoon was talking about that a little bit. We look at companies that have real programs in social equity, and not to be confused with their philanthropy. So it would be like the difference between donating some money to the Last Prisoner Project and actually hiring people from the last prisoner project, people that have been pretty unjustly and unfairly treated because of arrests and convictions for marijuana. And then the last one is governance, and that's kind of diversity at the C-suite, CEOs, CFOs, that's the C-suite, and also on the board level. What we know is that companies that have more diversity with women and minorities on the board actually do better, and they do better, you know, from a bottom line perspective on the EPS side. So, you know, we're very interested in screening all of our companies for ESG, and I think that ESG is becoming much more ingrained into every individual's investment plan. We know that 85% of individual investors are interested in ESG, and even more so with the millennials coming up. So that's a big deal. And now $1 in $3 that's invested is in companies that are ESG compliant. So that's our focus. We're looking to move companies down the court on the venture side and set them up from the beginning, so that they have all of these concepts and processes embedded in their strategy.
Yeah, that's so needed, because I will say I'll scorecard the industry on ESG since I entered it in 2012. I give it a failing grade on E, a failing grade on S, and a failing grade on G. We have had partly due to the regulator, our environmental footprint is enormous: power, water, and overpackaging. There has been not enough diversity in the C-suite and on the boards. There has not been enough empowerment of local communities, and a lot of communities in a dash to get rich quick ran roughshod over rules of governance that would have come at the oppression of minority shareholders. So this industry really needs to tighten its belt, and the way it tightens its belt is that it becomes a requirement of much needed and sought after investment capital that actually is scorecarding and making determinations on how they deploy their capital, just like your fund, that doesn't just whisper and pay lip service and make it sound good on their MD&A, but actually enforces it or does not invest in it.
Yeah, someone asked a question about the leverage you have to help move the needle that way. And that's a really interesting question, because you're exactly right. When I first started doing these screens, these ESG screens with the public companies last year, most of the CEOs did not know what ESG was. That was pretty telling in terms of, you know, what they're focused on.
Probably thought it was a stock symbol.
Exactly. Well, then, so there was the, you know, the what is it? And then there was the immediate, wow, another regulation, something else we need to do kind of attitude. But then now that we've been talking for, you know, several quarters about it, a lot of them are opening them up, and we are seeing these companies actually put programs into place around ESG. And we tell them, listen, we're one of the few institutional investors that focuses on cannabis, and we simply cannot invest in your company if you don't have an ESG plan in place. And that has started to move the needle. I was actually really surprised. I mean, look at Trulieve in Florida, which is another medical state. Kim Rivers, the CEO, put out a complete strategy report on ESG in October or November of last year. So these conversations are actually changing things, and that makes me really excited. But we have got a long way to go to get that kind of change fluid across the industry.
And the hardest part about this cannabis industry is actually getting funding. because cannabis is still federally illegal. You can't go to the bank and ask for a business loan. The bank wouldn't give it to you because it's still federally backed. So as an entrepreneur, you are limited on how you can get capital. And like for myself, I'm a minority. It was hard for me, but I also have, Caucasian counterparts. It was hard for them. So getting capital in this industry is not easy. You have a few options, friends and family. You can go to hard money lenders. You can go people like Kelly. And there's only three ways to really grow your business and elevate yourself, right? Is either you take on debt, you sell equity, or you use profit from your existing business to continue to fuel your expansion. So the cannabis industry needs services like Kelly. And going back to bank services, I'm really happy that more credit unions are actually opting in to servicing cannabis businesses.
Yeah.
I know for us in Oregon, we had to wait a whole 6 months because there was a backlog in order for us to even get our bank open. But we're the thing also to consider or think about, we are paying a ton of money just to have our service with a bank. Just to put our money in the bank, we're paying a lot of money. So it is a crazy industry to be in right now.
Sal, since you're working in Texas, what should an investor wanting to get into Texas look for?
Okay, so there's going to be a bunch of things. Number one, you have to pay attention to what the regulations will be that shape the market. Number two, you have to understand what the federal regulations are going to be and how that shapes the market, right? And then the third one is, this is not an industry of if you build it, they will come, right? Just because you're in a cannabis, just because you run and operate a dispensary, production facility, processing facility, does not mean that you will make money, right? So I think sort of having to put together a team, and when Texas comes online, there are going to be plenty of operators up and down the value chain who know what they are doing and probably know what they are doing better than you. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be more and more competitive. Understand the local demographics of where you're going to have your operation, and definitely understand how the regulations are going to pull out and how that will affect the economics of the whole state. I think that's the major things, but as everyone's been talking about, it all depends how Texas shapes up and who wants to enter Texas and what that looks like. And I think from there, that's sort of what I would pay attention to. And then also, Sarah was saying, like, build a good team, right? Build a good team no matter what, because it's going to be hard to succeed without it. Some people have been in this industry for like 20 years now, right? They know what they're doing. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, the competition's going to be crazy.
And I think there's one interesting point I'd like to touch on, especially as it applies to the ESG thing we were just talking about, the impact of Texas. So right now, 1% of all electricity uses is attributed to indoor cannabis grows in the United States. 1%. That's huge. In Denver Metro, once cannabis was allowed to be grown in that area, the electricity usage increased 40%. 40%. Like, this is not a sustainable path for this industry to continue business as usual, right? So we're either going to have to figure something out in terms of using better electricity mechanisms, lighting technology for indoor, or everything's going to shift to low-cost production states outdoor. And if that's going to be shipped all across the state. So it's really, as this market like grows, as all these factors become more important, especially under the current administration, there are a lot of influencing things that people probably aren't thinking about in terms of Texas, about what's going to make it effective to actually do business here. Because it's just more than getting a license at this point, right? There's a lot of economic factors, and a lot of regulatory factors.
Any closing thoughts about Texas cannabis?
Go big. Fast.
Yeah.
Everything is bigger in Texas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you can't run with the big dogs, stay on the porch. There's a Texas thing for you.
All right, thanks y'all so much. I appreciate
Thank
you sharing your expertise from
Thank you.
all around the globe.
Great. Thanks.
Lisa.
A pleasure. Thanks all. Really enjoyed it.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, elevator guys.